You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Rockies. This is Sarah Jane Maroney, your host, and this week we will be speaking with Eric Stone, Teller County Commissioner, District 3, and the Vice Chair of the Regional 16 Opioid Abatement Council. Eric is a 20-year resident of Woodland Park. After growing up in Wyoming, Eric and his wife made the decision to move to Teller County to raise their family. Eric works in digital marketing, and his wife is a longtime teacher at Woodland Park High School. They have two sons, Hunter and Hayden, who attend college. Eric also served as the chairman of the Teller County Republican Party and is a 2019 graduate of the Leadership Program of the Rockies. We welcome him. Hello, Eric. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
So we're here to talk all things opioid.
Yes, we are. And unfortunately, in our world right now, there's a lot of that going on out there. So it reaches into nearly every segment of our society, whether from homeless all the way to the most successful business people. It is a true scourge upon our country and our state, and certainly, our towns as well.
Yeah. So there's, I guess, maybe you could give us a little bit of background. There's a conglomeration between, or a sort of referencing between Teller County and El Paso County in terms of how we get funds and how this works.
Yeah, and so just a little background on the regional opioid abatement councils. The Attorney General of the state of Colorado had entered into settlement agreements with the various drug companies and drug retailers in Colorado to reach settlements. And off the top of my head, I can't remember the total amount of money they settled for, but it was north of $300 million for the state of Colorado. And the majority of that money is actually being spent and guided by local regional opioid abatement councils. And Teller and El Paso County are one of those councils. We are the ROAC number 16 from around the state. And off the top of my head, I don't remember how many there are total, but there's at least 16. And the reason that I think we were paired together, I think, is that there's just a lot of economic and also medical and service connections between Teller and El Paso counties. So that's why they're linked together. For the Region 16 Council right now, I think we're projected to receive, and it changes because they're continuing to settle with additional defendants within this, including, I think there'll still be a fairly large one coming because there's a one specific family that was involved with one of the largest drug manufacturers in the country that had declared bankruptcy to try to avoid a financial responsibility for the opioid crisis. And judges now ruled that they cannot use bankruptcy as a shield. So I think you'll see that go forward. But anyway, for Teller and El Paso counties, a little more than $30 million so far that we know will be coming in for us to be able to disperse out to the community in an effort to abate, prevent, and also treat those and help families affected by the opioid crisis.
Oh, that's amazing. So, and these are cases that have just come forward, people suing drug companies, et cetera?
Not people, actually, it's attorneys general from around the country, probably all 50 states, to be honest. And each of them individually from as states and as attorneys general, launch suits against a lot of these companies and then entering into settlement talks, not unlike what we saw with the tobacco companies, a couple of decades ago. But this, is specific to the opioid companies, which, according to the settlements in the courts and kind of what has come out, is that they were actually promoting the overprescription and overuse of what they knew was a highly addictive product without proper warnings, potentially, and also without the proper training going out to doctors and pharmacists about the dangers of people taking, these highly potent and addictive opioids.
So how did you're the vice chair of the council, why are you involved and what was your interest?
Well, I'm a county commissioner up here in Teller County, and county commissioners in small counties also serve as boards of health. And one of the things that I'm certainly aware of, again, because the opioid crisis strikes across all demographics. It affects rural counties, it affects urban counties, it affects homeless people, it also affects white collar people, it affects veterans at a very high level. And the reason is because these doctors and pharmacists and pharmaceutical companies were prescribing opioids, rightly or wrongly, depending on their level of training, whether it was intentional or not. It is very easy for people to get addicted to opioids, and in many ways, they were being handed out like candy. And unfortunately, the military was really good at this. Their active duty service people would be injured, whether active duty or in training, and they would prescribe opioids for pain management and get them hooked on it. And then it was easier to continue to give them opioids than it was to treat the base condition, which is that they had developed an addiction to those opioids. But what got me interested in it, though, is again, it affects our county just as much as it affects El Paso County. But the problem we have here in Teller County is that the services that we have available for our residents are very minimal. I mean, we're lucky to have one hospital with 13 beds up here in Teller County. Behavioral health services, although they're improving, are nowhere close to what they are in El Paso County. And frankly, in El Paso County, those resources are poor. So that makes it even that much worse for us here in Teller County. So I felt, and my fellow commissioners felt, like it was very important to make sure we were involved, and as part of the intergovernmental agreements that all of the municipalities and counties signed that are in Region 16, we each get a representative on that council. So my fellow commissioners and I decided that I would be the one to go serve on this commission or on this council. And once there, I thought it important that we have at least one rural voice as part of that leadership team of chair and vice chair. So I ran for vice chair and was elected by the council along with District Attorney Michael Allen, who's our chair.
Well, we're appreciative of your service.
My pleasure.
This look like? What does this look like in terms of, so opioids are prescribed by doctors and pharmacists and things like this, and yet we have also a fentanyl crisis. Is there a crossover between the illegal drugs and what is known as a legal drug and yet has gotten quite out of hand?
Yeah, not only is there a crossover, there's actually a direct causation. And here's what happened is, as I mentioned before, opioids are being handed out like candy, for lack of, a more formal description. So they were widely available, easily available. There's been many television programs about, doctors who were in the business of writing prescriptions for opioids, and people would travel to go visit those doctors, and then they would get those prescriptions filled. But then the federal government got involved, and they really tightened that up. They started filing charges against those doctors who were doing that, and they were shutting down pharmacies that were filling these massive prescriptions and multiple prescriptions that were known to be that if you were abusing opioids, you could go to this pharmacy and they won't question anything. Because pharmacies are supposed to question stuff when they see it. That's part of the job of a pharmacist, because they have a responsibility to patients as well, and they take a Hippocratic oath as well. So they didn't shut all of them down, but they greatly diminished, the proliferation of legal opioids in the marketplace. Well, the problem is you've got millions of addicted people out there. And what happens when the government then shrinks the supply? Well, they seek supply on the black market. And that's where fentanyl comes in, because there's a lot of illicit drug manufacturing, and people like to point at China, that China is producing a lot of these and then funneling it through Mexico, but it's being created in a lot of places and smuggled into the United States. But sometimes, though, because these aren't scientific pharmaceuticals that are being produced by large companies that are under regulations on the quality of the drugs, is sometimes they're actually creating cocktails where it's cheaper, because fentanyl is so amazingly powerful, is they might take something that might have a drug in it as a base that might be like Xanax or some other opioid or some other drug, but then they lace it with fentanyl because fentanyl is more powerful. The danger with that is that the difference between an opioid effect and frankly a poisoning is as much as as it's micrograms, not it's tiny amounts. I mean, we think about how much that is. We take an ibuprofen and it's 200 milligrams. Fentanyl is dispensed in micrograms. And so, if you double, triple that, then you end up with what they are now calling poisonings. They're actually, when it's unintentional, they're actually not even calling them overdoses anymore. These are poisonings, because people are unknowingly ingesting something which can and does kill them. And that's been the problem, now that it's moved over into the fentanyl space, is we have a lot of people in Colorado, throughout the country, that are dying. It's affecting, like I said, middle class families, college students, high school kids, who for the first time in their life, a friend talks them into, hey, take this pill, it's a Xanax, and it wasn't a Xanax, it was something laced with fentanyl, and we certainly have had it happen in El Paso County, where teens, their very first time trying, a drug like that leads to a poisoning where they died. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for those families. But, that's what we're trying to prevent in the future. But we also have a very large addiction issue, that we have to help try to solve. And I think there's certainly headway that's been made. Some of that headway was made before the opioid abatement councils were really getting their feet under them, which is great. That means that we can begin to focus in other areas because there's been a lot of success. And some of that success is in the proliferation now of Narcan throughout communities. And if you're not familiar with Narcan, basically it's a drug, it's a nasal spray that essentially counteracts an opioid overdose or an opioid poisoning and saves lives. I mean, it's amazing. It's almost like a miracle drug. Doesn't solve addiction, but it saves lives. And initially, first responders had it, but almost nobody else. But they've decided to make this available without any kind of prescription or anything to not nearly anyone. And, so it's in schools. It's in people's purses. I mean, it's gone that far in proliferation of this because all it is a nasal spray. If you suspect that someone, is having an overdose, you just, squirt this stuff in their nose, and it's like a miracle drug. It saves their life, and with enough time for EMS to get there and get them to the hospital and then further treat them. But with that proliferation, the number of fatal deaths from fentanyl over the last, I think it was 2 to 3 years, might be since 2020. I'd have to look at the exact statistic, but it's been reduced by 27%. That's a significant number over a very short period.
Where does someone get Narcan? Can you literally go to a pharmacy?
You can go to the library and get Narcan. Yeah, I mean, it's that easy to get. You can go to, fire stations. There's a whole bunch of places, public health departments, even your own doctor's offices will probably have Narcan that they can give you. And it literally it's not something you have to buy. It's something that, is being paid for and distributed so that, so that people can make it available and use it. And I know that, our library up here in Woodland Park, I noticed a sign the other day that, that they have Narcan available if people want it, so that they will be prepared should they come across anyone. And that's the other, again, I can't mention enough is that you never know really who, is affected by this opioid crisis and who might be addicted. It could be somebody, that you work with. It could be somebody at school. It could be, a lot of times we think that the larger drug problems are amongst a certain percentage of our population. The younger population is the only one, or the homeless populations are the only one. That's really not true. Those statistics clearly show that because of the way opioids were previously prescribed, is that it could be almost anybody. I mean, it could be, an Air Force officer. It could be somebody who works for a fire department that's trying to get back to duty, and so they give them a pain reliever. They were handing out opioids for dental surgery. After dental surgery, they give you opioids. So it could be anybody. So the push to get Narcan out there in the public, it's continuing because I think most of the population still doesn't know about Narcan. But as they continue to educate about it, and my first reaction to it, and I got to be honest, was a little negative about what we're gonna push this drug out into the general public, for people to be able to to deal with drug addicts. So it's kind of how I viewed it, and I viewed it a little negatively. But then once I got a little more educated about it, I was like, wow, okay, well this problem is much bigger, and it was too easy to say, well, it's the least of our society that's affected by this, and so why should we bother? Why should we go to this length? And the reality is yes, we should go to that length for any segment of our society, but also it's bigger than that. So if it needed to be doubled for the reason of why this should be out there, and actually what it does, understanding what it does is that it immediately stops the effects of an overdose and saves a life. It's pretty tremendous. And so getting the word out about Narcan and the fact that it's available in many places, you go to health fairs and they'll be passing out Narcan. And of course, the amount of time from the overdose until when the Narcan is given, there can be a whole series of medical problems that can come from that, whether it be, preventing, the person oxygen going to the brain, or, or other damage that may be occurring to internal organs. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know, but there's lots of really bad things that can be happening while they're in that overdose or poison state, but the Narcan, does stop it, reverse it to a degree. And again, I'm not a doctor, so I won't make any more wild sweeping things to say other than it saves lives.
Oh, that's amazing. So, in terms of the Opioid Council, and so you're allocating funds, but what are the things that you are doing in Teller and El Paso with those funds specifically?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. And what the council has done is initially is we sat down and we created areas of concern, and we worked a lot with the community about this and brought in a lot of people with lived experience with opioid death, with overdosing, with addiction. We had parents of kids who died who came in and talked about, for example, the lack of support for families, not just dealing with addiction, but families dealing with death from addiction. And an example of this, there were a couple of young men that were UCCS students that both died of opioid poisoning, and their father is a big advocate, and his name escapes me at this moment, so I hope he'll forgive me. But he's a big advocate for fighting this opioid crisis, and he was very involved all the way through this. He speaks throughout the state about his loss and the importance of this effort. So one of the areas, as a family advocate, one of the things he was talking about was, if you're a victim of a crime, and say, for example, that someone in your house dies as a victim of a crime, is we have victims advocates, and we have people who'll come in with crime scene mitigation, and they'll help you get the house cleaned up. They'll help you with counseling. They'll help the families. None of that existed for families of poisoning/overdose victims. So one of the areas that we're working on, for example, there's a grant that was provided to the Colorado Springs Fire Department where they work with families dealing with a death involving opioid addictions. They help them with uh, home cleanup. They help them with counseling. They can help them with just costs involved with, from losing a family member in such a tragic way, potentially ongoing counseling, but kind of very similar to what a victims advocacy office would do. The Colorado Springs Fire Department is now doing. So family advocacy was one area. Another thing that we learned is that there's a lot of people who are addicted to opioids that unfortunately, because of their addiction, are committing criminal acts, whether it's theft or other acts that they end up in our justice system, and ultimately they end up in our county jails. Well, they come into county jails, but the state requires that the jails provide behavioral health services, including addiction treatment, to people in jails. But as soon as they're released, that stops. Just boom. Just all of that help that they were getting through the jails stops as soon as they walk out the front door of the jail. So we've got a program with the El Paso County Sheriff's Department where they are developing essentially a handoff program and a program where they can provide Narcan, as well as there's a drug out there that is, when you think of like heroin addiction, there are drug programs where you can go in and you take a drug that's not heroin that is more controllable and is given under a controlled environment, but that drug also gives a high, but it helps them to wean away and then get treatment and therapy in order to no longer be addicted to heroin. Well, with opioids, Suboxone. And Suboxone is interesting because instead of acting, like what methadone does for people who are addicted to heroin, it's still an opiate, right? With Suboxone, it actually makes that craving for the opioid go away. It's pretty remarkable what it does. And so basically, if they can get them into Suboxone and then into therapy, is it makes that craving go away, does not give them that same high or whatever it was they were getting out of the opioid. They do not get that out of Suboxone, but it does decrease dramatically that addictive desire for it. So it kind of tricks the body, but it's not something you can use forever, though. But what it does do is provide, a period of time of stability so they can get back to work. They can enter into counseling and begin to work towards, a drug-free life. Well, from the jail scenario is they will begin to treat them with Suboxone at the jail, but then once they rotate them out, not only will they give them a supply of Suboxone, but that might be good for a week or 10 days, but then they also give them a handoff to one of the many drug therapy groups, and they can also get them connected as well with support groups as well, because that's the other thing that's super important. is that very few people make it out of addiction alone, that they need support. They need friends. They need people, frankly, with lived experience of what they've gone through to help them get through. So, the Sheriff's Department has that program for their jail. And then there's a bunch of other programs out there for youth prevention that we're working on and getting into. I think part of the issues that we're looking at there is that we're looking to build programs that don't exist because the opportunity's never been there. And I think that's one of the big challenges with effectively spending this money is that we're looking for new and innovative ways to reach segments of the population that have previously never been reached, never been treated. So, as we go through this, I think that's what we're hoping to see, especially on the youth prevention side. And there's a group that hasn't been approved yet, but I know that it's been they've been to a lot of our meetings, but they're expanding into Southern Colorado. It's a group called Full Circle out of Denver, and they brought in a lot of kids, and I say kids because they're teenagers and young adults who are affected by opioid addiction. I also want to be real clear is that opioid addiction usually doesn't live by itself. Another thing that we've learned is that they're taking lots of different drugs. And sometimes it's due to availability, what they can get, but they're taking high potency THC, which is an issue. They're taking these opioids, and fentanyl, but they could potentially cross over into other things like heroin and other things. So there's a broad addiction. Alcohol also is part of this as well. So what Full Circle has done is they've created a support group that's specific for young people, because these young people, they would be taken to a 12-step program, kind of similar to an Alcoholics Anonymous, to deal with drug addiction. And as they said, I'm sitting around in a room in a circle with chairs with old guys. They just said, I got nothing in common with these people. I'm not really getting the support I need from this. And what Full Circle does is not only do they set up, these meetings where they can come, but also they're fun. It's different than Alcoholics Anonymous or other 12-step programs. Kids still want to have fun, and that's what they talk about. Is that not only can they go and have fun and be active. Worst thing you can do for young people is put them in a room, sit them in chairs, make them sit in chairs. So they're up and they're active and they're talking and there's music. But they also schedule events and do things around, to promote activities that don't involve drugs, that don't involve the things that lead them down that path. Well, Full Circle has been very successful up in the Denver metro area, and they want to expand here. Actually, they have expanded. They have started, but they're asking for funds from the Opioid Policy Council to help them, get some roots set down and actually, get an office and be able to not house, but, be able to, to have office space, for that organization. And they just applied, and I personally support them, getting funded for this.
So in terms of your experience on the Opioid Council and all the things that you've encountered, I guess the final question would be, what has surprised you the most?
Boy, what surprised me the most? I think the thing that surprised me the most out of all of it was that opioid abuse and opioid addiction can strike anywhere. In my mind, every other drug crisis that we've had, heroin, cocaine, those have generally affected a segment of the population. That disproportionately, for example, they talk about how crack and crack cocaine disproportionately affected the African American population within our society. That's not the case with this. It can affect middle class. It can affect the poor, the rich, and in some ways, those who had insurance might even be more at risk because they were being prescribed these drugs and they could pay for it. Their insurance would pay for it. So literally, it could be anybody. It could be a fireman. It could be a serviceman. It could be a teacher. It could be a student. Anybody, homeless people, it doesn't matter. It could be anybody. And understanding what a huge, broad problem it was the biggest shock of the whole thing. Is that it's not like you can go to one part of town and we can wipe out 80% of the problem. It's the whole town. It's in the rural areas. It's everywhere. I mean, you got ranchers out there who routinely, if you have friends who are ranchers or farmers, they routinely get injured because they're out there working injured. And if they're going to work, they want to be able to treat their pain so that they continue to work. But the problem is they could get easily addicted to what's prescribed to them. So, on the provider side, I think we're in a much better place. In the preventing death, we're in a much better place because of Narcan. And now I think we need to really, really focus on a couple of things, which is increasing the total numbers and ways that we can help treat people, and then also prevention in the future, both youth as well as across across the population.
Well, Eric, I've learned so much, and it's been really interesting. It sounds like a tragic problem, but something that we're making headway on, which is really encouraging.
Yeah, it is encouraging. And like I said, the recent numbers that just came out showing a significant drop in in opioid deaths. I mean, that's something. Wow, certainly be celebrated. That's great. And as I said, a lot of that came even prior to the existence of the opioid abatement councils. So good work has been done, and we're going to be able to do even more.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.